Sexual Harassment in Long-Term Care, presented by myalftraining.com. The Supreme Court, 30 years ago, recognized claims for sexual harassment as a form of discrimination based on sex under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act 1964. There are two types of harassment in the workplace: quid pro quo and hostile environment harassment. Quid pro quo sexual harassment occurs when a person in authority trades or tries to trade job benefits for sexual favors. Quid pro quo is a legal term meaning a trade. This type of harassment occurs between an employee and someone with authority, like a supervisor, who has the ability to grant or withhold job benefits. Quid pro quo sexual harassment includes offering or granting better working conditions or opportunities in exchange for a sexual relationship, threatening adverse working conditions like demotions, shift alterations, or work location changes, or denial of opportunity if a sexual relationship is refused. Using pressure, threats of physical acts to force a sexual relationship, or retaliating for refusing to engage in a sexual relationship. A hostile environment on the basis of sex may be created by words, signs, jokes, pranks, intimidation, physical actions or violence, either of a sexual nature or not of a sexual nature, directed at an individual because of that individual's sex. Hostile environment sexual harassment includes sexual or discriminatory displays or publications anywhere in the workplace, such as displaying pictures, posters, calendars, graffiti, objects, promotional materials, reading materials, or other materials that are sexually demeaning or pornographic. This includes such sexual displays on workplace computers or cell phones and sharing such displays while in the workplace. Hostile actions taken against an individual because of that individual's sex, such as interfering with, destroying, or damaging a person's workstation, tools or equipment, or otherwise interfering with the individual's ability to perform the job. Sabotaging an individual's work, bullying, yelling, or name-calling. Workplace harassment remains a persistent problem. Almost fully 1/3 of the approximately 90,000 charges received by the EEOC in fiscal year 2015 included an allegation of workplace harassment. This includes, among other things, charges of unlawful harassment on the basis of sex, including sexual orientation, gender identity, and pregnancy, race, disability, age, ethnicity, national origin, color, and religion. Workplace harassment too often goes unreported. Common workplace-based responses by those who experience sex-based harassment are to avoid the harasser, deny or downplay the gravity of the situation, or attempt to ignore, forget, or endure the behavior. The least common response to harassment is to take some formal action, either to report the harassment internally or file a formal legal complaint. Roughly 3 out of 4 individuals who experienced harassment never even talked to a supervisor, manager, or union representative about the harassing conduct. Employees who experience harassment often fail to report the harassing behavior or to file a complaint because they fear disbelief of their claim, inaction on their claim, blame, or social or professional retaliation. There is a compelling business case for stopping and preventing harassment. When employers consider the cost of workplace harassment, they often focus on legal cost, and with good reason. Last year, EEOC alone recovered $164.5 million for workers alleging harassment, and these direct costs are just the tip of the iceberg. Workplace harassment, first and foremost, comes at a steep cost to those who suffer it as they experience mental, physical, and economic harm. Beyond that, workplace harassment affects all workers, and its true cost includes decreased productivity, increased turnover, and reputational harm. All of this is a drag on performance and the bottom line. It starts at the top. Leadership and accountability are critical. Workplace culture has the greatest impact on allowing harassment to flourish, or conversely, in preventing harassment. The importance of leadership cannot be overstated. Effective harassment prevention efforts and workplace culture in which harassment is not tolerated must start with and involve the highest levels of management of the company. But a commitment, even from the top, to a diverse, inclusive, and respectful workplace is not enough. Rather, at all levels across all positions, an organization must have a system in place that holds employees accountable for this expectation. Accountability systems must ensure that those who engage in harassment are held responsible in a meaningful, appropriate, and proportional manner, and those whose jobs it is to prevent or respond to harassment should be rewarded for doing that job well, or penalized for failing to do so. Finally, leadership means ensuring that anti-harassment efforts are given the necessary time and resources to be effective. Sex-based harassment. Based on testimony to the Select Task Force and various academic articles, we learned that anywhere from 25% to 85% of women report having experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. Gender identity-based and sexual orientation-based harassment. There are few nationally representative surveys of harassment experienced by transgender and lesbian, gay, or bisexual employees. Such harassment may include sexually based behaviors such as unwanted sexual touching or demands for sexual favors, as well as gender-based harassment such as name-calling. In one survey, 35% of LGBT-identified respondents who reported being open at work reported having been harassed in the workplace. In another survey, LGBT respondents were asked specifically whether they heard derogatory comments about sexual orientation and gender identity in their workplaces. In that survey, 58% of LGBT respondents said they had heard such comments. Race-based and ethnicity-based harassment. In one of the first studies of racial and ethnic harassment, between 40 and 60% of respondents reported experiencing some form of racial or ethnic harassment. In this study, harassment was defined to include threatening verbal conduct such as comments, jokes, and slurs related to one's ethnicity or race, as well as exclusionary behaviors such as being excluded from a social event, not being given necessary information because of one's ethnicity or race, or being pressured to give up one's ethnic racial identity in order to fit in. In another survey, researchers found that 70% of respondents reported experiencing some form of verbal harassment and 45% reported experiencing exclusionary behaviors. In addition, 69% of respondents reported witnessing at least one ethnically harassing behavior in the last 2 years at work, and 36% of respondents who reported that they had not experienced direct harassment indicated that they had knowledge of harassment of other coworkers. Disability-based harassment. In a survey, 20% of respondents with disabilities reported experiencing harassment or unfair treatment at work because of their disability. In addition, 6% of respondents reported having observed harassment or similar unfair treatment of a coworker with a disability. Age-based and religion-based harassment. In a survey of coworkers older than 50, 8% of respondents reported having been exposed to unwelcome comments about their age. When the same question was asked in a survey of workers older than 50 in New York City, close to 25% reported that they or a family member had been subjected to unwelcome comments about their age in the workplace. Intersectional harassment. As people hold multiple identities, they can also experience harassment on the basis of more than one identity group. For example, an African American woman may experience harassment because she is a woman, but also because of her racial identity. There is increasing evidence that targets of harassment often experience mistreatment in multiple forms, such as because of one's race and gender or ethnicity and religion. The case of the superstar harasser. Employers may find themselves in a position where the harasser is a workplace superstar. By superstar, think of the high-earning trader at an investment bank, the law firm partner who brings in lucrative clients, or the renowned professor or surgeon. Some of these individuals, as with any employee, may be as likely to engage in harassment as others. Often, however, superstars are privileged with higher income, better accommodations, and different expectations. That privilege can lead to a self-view that they are above the rules, which can foster mistreatment. Psychologists have detailed how power can make an individual feel uninhibited and thus more likely to engage in inappropriate behaviors. In short, superstar status can be a breeding ground for harassment. When the superstar misbehaves, employers may perceive themselves in a quandary. They may be tempted to ignore the misconduct because the thinking goes, losing the superstar would be too costly. They may wager that the likelihood or cost of a complaint of misbehavior is relatively low, outweighed by the superstar's productivity. Some employers may even use this type of rationale to cover or retaliate for a harasser. No matter who the harasser is, the negative effects of harassment can cause serious damage to a business. Behaviors that could be sexual harassment. It should be noted that these behaviors by themselves may not be considered harassment. The legal standard for sexual harassment requires the behaviors to be continuous, unwanted, and meet the reasonable person standard, which is, would a reasonable person find the behavior offensive? And those behaviors are physical behaviors, verbal behaviors, and nonverbal behaviors. Common examples: physical actions, giving a neck or shoulder massage, touching a person's body, hair, or clothing, hugging, kissing, or patting another, standing close to or brushing up against a person, touching or rubbing oneself in a private area or with sexual overtones near the person, exposing oneself, touching, leaning over, cornering or pinching someone, or snapping a woman's bra strap. Common examples of verbal actions include referring to another as a girl, doll, babe, hunk, or honey, whistling or making catcalls at another, making comments about a person's body, clothes, looks, anatomy, or manner in walking, turning work discussions into sexual topics, telling sexual jokes or stories, discussing one's love life, asking about sexual fantasies, preferences, or history, repeatedly asking a person for a date who clearly is not interested, making kissing sounds, howling, or smacking lips, or telling lies or spreading rumors about a person's sex life. Common examples: nonverbal actions, looking a person up and down, elevator eyes, staring at someone, blocking a person's path, making sexual gestures with one's tongue or hand or other body movements, following a person around, giving unwanted personal gifts, displaying sexually suggestive visuals, calendars, pictures, comics, or food displays, making sexual overtures, comments, or propositions via electronic email and electronic media such as text messages, instant messages, emails, or social media sites, making facial expressions such as winking, throwing kisses, licking lips, or requiring an employee to wear provocative clothing. Risk factors for harassment. Homogeneous workforces. Harassment is more likely to occur when there is a lack of diversity in the workplace. For example, sexual harassment of women is more likely to occur in workplaces that have primarily male employees, and racial/ethnic harassment is more likely to occur where one race is ethnically predominant. Workplaces where some workers do not conform to workplace norms. Harassment is more likely to occur where a minority of workers do not conform to the workplace norms based on societal stereotypes. For example, a feminine acting man in a predominantly male work environment that includes crude language and sexual banter, or a woman who challenges gender norms by being tough enough to do a job in a traditionally male-dominated environment. Risk factors for harassment continued. Cultural and language differences in the workplace. It might seem ironic, given the first risk factor of a homogeneous workforce, that workplaces that are extremely diverse also pose a risk factor for harassment. This has been found to be the case, especially when there has been a recent influx of individuals with different cultures or nationalities in a workplace, or where a workplace contains significant blocks of workers from different cultures. Coercion social discourse outside the workplace. Events outside a workplace may pose a risk factor that employees need to consider and proactively address as appropriate. For example, the 9/11 attacks, there was a noted increase in workplace harassment based on religion and national origin. Risk factors for harassment continued. Workforces with many young workers. Workplaces with many teenagers and young adults may raise the risk for harassment. Workers in their first or second jobs may be less aware of laws and workplace norms. For example, what is and is not appropriate behavior in the workplace. Young workers who engage in harassment may lack the maturity to understand or care about the consequences. Young workers who are the targets of harassment may lack the self-confidence to resist unwelcome overtures or challenge conduct that makes them uncomfortable. Finally, young workers who are in unskilled and precarious jobs may be more susceptible to being taken advantage of by coworkers or superiors, particularly those who may be older and more established in their positions. Risk factors for harassment continued. Workplaces with high-value employees. As noted in the discussion regarding the business case, there are workforces in which some employees are perceived to be particularly valuable to the employer. These workplaces provide opportunities for harassment, since senior management may be reluctant to challenge the behavior of their high-value employees, and the high-value employees themselves may believe that the general rules of the workplace do not apply to them. Workplaces with significant power disparities. Significant power disparities between different groups of workers in most workplaces, such disparities can be a risk factor. For example, workplaces where there are executives and administrative support staff. Workplaces that rely on customer service or client satisfaction. Workplaces where an employee's compensation may be directly tied to customer satisfaction or client service. For example, a tipped worker may feel compelled to tolerate inappropriate and harassing behavior rather than suffer the financial loss of a good tip. In order to ensure customer happiness, management may consciously or subconsciously tolerate harassing behavior rather than intervene on the worker's behalf. Risk factors continued. Workplaces where work is monotonous or consists of low-intensity tasks. Workplaces where workers are engaged in monotonous or low-intensity tasks may be more likely to see workplace harassment. Workers are not actively engaged or have time on their hands. Harassing or bullying behavior may become a way to vent frustration and avoid boredom. Isolated workspaces. Harassment is also more likely to occur in isolated workspaces, where the workers are physically isolated or have few opportunities to work with others. Harassers have easy access to such individuals, and there are generally no witnesses to the harassment. For example, janitors working alone on the night shift, housekeepers working in individual hotel rooms. Workplace cultures that tolerate or encourage alcohol consumption. Alcohol reduces social inhibitors and impairs judgment. Not surprisingly then, workplace cultures that tolerate alcohol consumption during and around work hours provide a greater opportunity for harassment. Workplaces where alcohol is consumed by clients or customers are also a higher risk of harassment. In some workplaces, alcohol consumption may become an issue once or twice a year at holiday parties. Organizational recommendations. Employers should foster an organizational culture in which harassment is not tolerated and in which respect and civility are promoted. Employers should communicate and model a consistent commitment to that goal. Employers should assess their workplaces for the risk factors associated with harassment and explore ideas for minimizing those risks. Employers should conduct climate surveys to assess the extent to which harassment is a problem in their organization. Employers should devote sufficient resources to harassment prevention efforts, both to ensure that such efforts are effective and to reinforce the credibility of leadership's commitment to creating a workplace free of harassment. Employers should ensure that where harassment is found to have occurred, discipline is prompt and proportionate to the severity of the infraction. In addition, employers should ensure that where harassment is found to have occurred, discipline is consistent and does not give or create the appearance of undue favor to any particular employee. Employers should hold mid-level managers and frontline supervisors accountable for preventing and/or responding to workplace harassment, including through the use of metrics and performance reviews. If employers have a diversity and inclusion strategy and budget, harassment prevention should be an integral part of that strategy. Policies and procedures. Policies, reporting procedures, investigations, and corrective actions are essential components of the holistic effort that employers must engage in to prevent harassment. Anti-harassment policies. An organization needs a stated policy against harassment that sets forth the behaviors that will not be accepted in the workplace and the procedures to follow in reporting and responding to harassment. Employees in workplaces without policies report the highest level of harassment. Social media. The use of social media among employees in a workplace can be a net positive. Social media use in the workplace can create a space for less formal and more frequent communication. Through social media, employees can share information about themselves, learn about and better understand their colleagues, and engage each other's personal experiences through photos, comments, and the like. If this leads to an improved work relationship and collegiality, social media can be a benefit in the workplace. Unfortunately, social media can also foster toxic interactions. Nearly daily, news reports reflect that, for whatever reason, many use social media to attack and harass others. Harassment should be in the employer's minds as they draft social media policies, and conversely, social media issues should be in the employer's mind as they draft anti-harassment policies. For example, an anti-harassment policy should make clear that mistreatment on social media carries the weight of any other workplace interaction. Supervisors and others with anti-harassment responsibilities should be wary of their social media connections with employees. And procedures for investigating harassment should carefully delineate how to access employees' social media content when warranted. Organizational recommendations, policies, and procedures. Employers should adopt and maintain a comprehensive anti-harassment policy which prohibits harassment based on any protected characteristic and which includes social media considerations, and should establish procedures consistent with the principles discussed in this report. Employers should ensure that anti-harassment policy and, in particular, details about how to complain of harassment and how to report observed harassment are communicated frequently to employees in a variety of forms and methods. Employers should offer reporting procedures that are multifaceted, offering a range of methods, multi-point of contact, and geographic and organizational diversity where possible for an employee to report harassment. Employers should be alert for any possibility of retaliation against an employee who reports harassment and should take steps to ensure that such retaliation does not occur. Employers should devote sufficient resources so that workplace investigations are prompt, objective, and thorough. Investigations should be kept as confidential as possible, recognizing that complete confidentiality or anonymity will not always be attainable. Employers should ensure that where harassment is found to have occurred, discipline is prompt and proportionate to the behaviors at issue and the severity of the infraction. Employers should ensure that discipline is consistent and does not give or create the appearance of undue favor to any particular employee. Harassment of long-term care residents. You are entrusted with the care of a vulnerable population who require assistance with their basic tasks of living. Residents may require help with medications, ambulation, toileting, bathing, eating, hygiene, just to name a few. Residents of long-term care tend to be particularly vulnerable and in a weak and fragile state because of the impact of medications or because of their underlying disease state that caused their placement. Residents may also be suffering from dementia or other altered mental state conditions and are particularly vulnerable. As a result, when sexual assaults occur, victims in LTC, long-term care, are even more vulnerable than victims in other circumstances. Resident harassment and abuse. Harassment of any type in long-term care could be considered abuse, neglect, or exploitation. If you suspect a resident has been harassed, follow your procedures for reporting abuse. Follow up with your management to be sure the resident is no longer in jeopardy. Respondent superior often fails in sexual assault cases. Under the doctrine of respondent superior, an employer is responsible for the actions of an employee if it falls within the course of the scope of the duties of the employee. Corporate negligence for sexual assault could be considered if the assault is foreseeable. If the facility was administratively negligent in failing to establish the safest possible environment by flawed or incomplete hiring, training, supervising, or retaining a questionable employee. Administrative negligence in hiring. The process of protecting residents begins with the Human Resources Department and the pre-employment screening and applicant vetting process. The majority of incidents are committed by facility employees. Caregiving staff, such as nurses, nurse aides, or therapists, ancillary staff, technicians, transporters, job classifications that allow close proximity and physical interaction with patients. An example of administrative negligence is failure to independently validate all details of the applicant's qualifications, licensure, and credentials. Check references from previous employers, question and reconcile all gaps in employment history, and perform a comprehensive criminal background check. Administrative negligence in supervision. In an unpublished case, an aide who was transporting a patient from the emergency department to a nurse's station diverted the patient to an unattended nursing station, closed the door to the vacant patient room, and assaulted a sedated patient repeatedly. The receiving nursing unit had been made aware that the patient would be transferred from the emergency department, but the hospital's policy did not require specification of the time of transfer. As a result, the receiving unit had no specific expectation as to when the patient would arrive. This hospital also failed to have a policy requiring that patients be transported from one unit to another, be accompanied by a nurse in addition to a transporter. The jury found the hospital to be administratively negligent by its failure to establish such policies and procedures and attach liability to the hospital rather than to the perpetrator. Administrative negligence in retention. Long-term care facilities often respond to sexual abuse claims by attempting to explain or deny the accusation. Resident complaints of harassment or abuse are often explained as hallucination, imagination, or dementia-related symptoms. It can also be explained as a misunderstanding of the process of providing care. Often, the inherent characteristics of long-term care staff is to protect the reputation of their employer. This can provide a shield for a predator, effectively enabling serial predators to continue to abuse patients, even when multiple complaints are received by administrators and senior staff. Patients rarely are believed. Patient complaints to a supervisor can assume that the patient was dreaming or hallucinating because of the effect of medication. Supervisors are often not trained in investigative training. Human resources staff who interview residents often have no investigative training. Often the resident complaint is considered resolved and no further action is taken. A report of the complaint and the resolution may be placed in the employee's personnel file. When another complaint about the same employee is made at a later date, there may be a new supervisor who has no knowledge of the initial complaint. At that point, the interview and resolution begins again. Thus, the serial predator has been created as a result of the facility negligence. Assault by outsiders or visitors. Patient abuse by visitors and intruders occurs when facilities fail to establish and implement visitor policies and procedures to protect residents. Abusers could be legitimate or unauthorized visitors. Many facilities require visitors to sign in. However, they are rarely asked for the name of the resident they are visiting and for proper identification. In addition, there should be a process of following up on and overseeing visitors while they are on the premises and verify that they have left. Procedures should also include stick-on name badges for visitors. Staff should be trained to be aware of all visitors, respectfully engage each visitor, and verify their destination. Administrative failure to train. Facilities often require new employees to receive training on sexual harassment policies and procedures. Other than this initial training, many facilities do not offer recurring education covering harassment. Curriculum should address enforcing policies and procedures for addressing and responding to complaints of harassment or assault, as well as policies related to hiring and reporting. Facilities could be negligent by failing to create a sense of priority for all matters related to harassment and assault. In conclusion, are you familiar with your facility's policies and procedures regarding harassment? If you are not, ask your management to review these policies. Consider requiring all staff to take annual training on your facility's policies and procedures. Harassment of residents or employees is a foreseeable problem. Implementing a comprehensive training program will go a long way to avoid major issues in the future.